A teapot toppled on the floor. An accident or a clue? Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Umbra. Comment below. Where are you tuning in from today? Your voices make this mystery come alive. Let's begin. I'll grant you that in the long list of insults and intrusions committed against the brownstone, a teapot doesn't seem like much. We've had cops tromp mud across the parquet, clients sobbing loud enough to disturb the orchids, and more than one killer who thought the office rug was as good a place as any to collapse. Compared to those, a plain porcelain teapot on the floor shouldn't rank. But that's the trouble with Wolfe. He decides what ranks, not me. And when he raises both eyebrows at once, it means something is out of order. The thing started innocently enough if you count Inspector Kramer showing up with a scowl as innocent. Fritz had just announced lunch, veal with a mustard cream sauce, and I was working on getting Wolfe downstairs to the dining room without delay. When the doorbell rang, Wolfe grunted his refusal in the usual way, but since Fritz had both hands on a platter, I had to go see who dared. It was Kramer. No warrant, no cigar, just the bulldog face and his hat yanked low. "Goodwin," he said, pushing past like he'd rented the place. "Where's Wolfe?" "Probably halfway through deciding whether the veal deserves mustard cream or mustard alone, but since you've come all the way downtown without so much as phoning, I'll take you to him. Try not to growl on the way. Fritz has delicate ears." Kramer didn't smile. He followed me into the office, where Wolfe sat in the big chair behind his desk, looking like a man obliged to listen to a preacher he didn't subscribe to. "Well, Mr. Kramer," Wolfe said, not rising, "what domestic disaster drives you here at the very hour when civilized men eat?" Kramer didn't bother with pleasantries. He slapped a folded sheet of paper onto the desk. "You know a woman named Clara Vardell?" Wolfe glanced at the paper but didn't touch it. "I know of her. Heiress, dilettante patroness of the arts, 3 times married, twice widowed, once divorced. Lives uptown in a limestone monstrosity. Why? She claims you've been sent a warning." Hand delivered. Now that perked me up, because if anyone had delivered anything in the last 24 hours, it had been me opening the door. "News to me," I said. "We've had the mail as usual, but nothing with flashing skulls on it." Kramer jabbed a finger at me. "This morning her maid swears she brought a package here. Plain wrapping, no note. Said it was left inside your vestibule." I shook my head. "Unless Fritz is hiding parcels in the pantry with the canned tomatoes, there hasn't been anything." "Pfui," Wolfe muttered, leaning back. "Kramer, if a woman sends a maid with an anonymous object and it fails to arrive, that is the woman's concern, not mine." "I do not inventory lost parcels," Kramer grunted. "Then explain this." He reached down to a brown paper sack he'd carried in, and out came the teapot, white, delicate, a little old-fashioned with faded blue filigree. He set it on the rug by Wolfe's chair, deliberately, like dropping a snake. "Her maid says this is what she delivered." We found it on her stoop half an hour later. Only difference, when we opened it up at the precinct, there was a folded note inside. "A threat threatening what?" Wolfe asked. "Not what. Who, Clara Vardell, says she'll be ruined within a week unless she confesses. Doesn't say to what Kramer's eyes narrowed. And the maid swears she put the package inside this house. If she's lying, I'll prove it. But if she's not, someone took it out again." I glanced at Wolfe, but his face was unreadable. He stared at the teapot as if it were a rare beetle he'd been asked to classify. After a long moment, he said, "Take it away." Kramer stiffened. "That's it?" "Yes. I neither requested nor accepted it. Its contents are of no consequence to me. Your case, your problem," Kramer swore under his breath, grabbed the teapot and stomped out. I saw him to the door and came back shaking my head. "Somebody's playing musical teapots and you don't care?" I asked Wolfe. He pressed his lips together, then reached for the bell cord and gave it a tug. Fritz appeared, apron immaculate. "Fritz," Wolfe said, "after lunch I would appreciate it if you checked the vestibule carefully. Every corner, you will look for dust out of place, smudges on the tiles, the slightest sign that an intruder has tampered with it." Fritz nodded, eyes wide, and went back to the kitchen. Wolfe closed his eyes. That was all. No lecture, no orders for me to tail Clara Vardell, no muttering about female folly. Just a teapot left on the floor briefly, and Wolfe acting like a man who had smelled something faintly sour, but wasn't ready to name it. I would have let it drop, except for what happened that evening. I was at my desk, running through the week's bills, when I heard a faint clink on the tiled vestibule floor. It wasn't the mail slot. That had already been cleared. I got up fast and opened the door. Empty street, nothing moving but a cab turning the corner. I looked down. There it was again. The teapot. Sitting square in the middle of the vestibule tiles, its lid tilted as if in greeting. I didn't touch it with bare fingers. Maybe that's my natural caution, or maybe I just didn't want Wolfe saying I'd invited contamination into the house like a careless nurse. I used a handkerchief, tilted the lid with the edge of a fingernail, and saw nothing. No note, no rattle of a second lid or a nest of spiders. It had the same thin blue scroll work as the one Kramer had set down like a challenge coin, but the filigree on this one was a shade lighter, and there was a hairline chip at the underside. Of the spout, I didn't remember. If you think I'm the kind of man who memorizes the spouts of teapots, you've never lived with Nero Wolfe. Things matter, or they don't, and you don't get to pick which. I set it on the vestibule tiles exactly where it had been, stepped back into the hall, and closed the inner door. Wolfe didn't holler. He didn't need to. I walked into the office and found him half-lidded behind the desk, looking like a Roman magistrate waiting to be bribed. I gave him the digest. He listened without moving anything but the left eyebrow. "Empty?" he asked. "Empty. No skittering horrors and no confession. The paint is a touch lighter and the spout has a nick." He didn't care for humming, which meant he cared. "Leave it where it is. Fritz will watch the door. If our visitor finds it missing, he will be disappointed, assuming our visitor comes back. He will." Wolfe let his lids close fully for 3 beats. It is the nature of rituals to be repeated. I was about to ask whether we were in the habit of hosting rituals in the vestibule when the doorbell rang again, single emphatic press. I started, but Wolfe only said, "Bring them." If you've ever watched a woman arrive who has learned to use a cloakroom as a stage, you know the entry that Clara Vardell made. She came with a draft of cold air and a flicker of street noise, a fair coat over a dress that didn't need to be told it was expensive. She wasn't alone. A woman 5 years younger and 5 levels more nervous hovered behind her with a wool hat gripped in both hands. "Mr. Wolfe." Clara's voice was warm brandy and a scrape of ice. "I'm sorry to intrude." I didn't trust the telephone. "May we?" "You may," Wolfe said. "This is an intrusion by degree. You have not yet entered my kitchen and you are still breathing. Mr. Goodwin will take your coats." He flicked me a glance. "If you please." I hung the coats and brought them into the office. The younger woman kept glancing toward the hall like she was expecting someone to pour back out of it. I noticed Wolfe noticed her. He could make noticing a full-time profession. "This is my assistant, Nella Prout," Clara said, settling into the red leather chair that does not fit everyone but made room for her. "I think my maid confused things this morning." She did bring a parcel. I sent it, but I didn't anticipate police attention. She spoke to Wolfe, but her eyes breezed over me, measuring. "Few anticipate police attention," Wolfe said dryly. "They are not flowers, to be arranged." "Why the teapot?" Clara's lips pressed. For the first time, the polish cracked, and you could see the human joints underneath. It was left on my library table 3 weeks ago, with a note folded under the lid. Confess by week's end or be ruined. That was the first. Then a second and a third. I destroyed the notes. I do not care to keep such things in my house. A woman who destroys notes, Wolfe murmured, is either prudent or panicked. We shall discover which. To what were you to confess? She looked at her hands. No act is named. Merely the afternoon on Marble Street. There are a dozen afternoons on Marble Street in my life. She glanced up. The messages imply that I spoiled something or took what wasn't mine. It's nonsense. We can hope, Wolfe said. Why send one of the objects to me? Because someone keeps entering houses that are not theirs. She cut her eyes toward the hall. When the first teapot appeared, we changed the locks. When the second, we hired a man to sit in the foyer for a week. The third arrived while he was using the lavatory. This morning I meant to deliver the fourth to you because I heard you had an appetite for irregularities. But it seems your vestibule has been initiated duly, I put in. You might say baptized. Nella Prout flinched. She hadn't sat. She stood at the edge of the rug with her hat, white around the knuckles. She had straight brown hair that listed to one side like a roof tile and the nerves of a rabbit who had learned to read calendars. Please, she said, and stopped because she didn't have a sentence after it. Wolfe shifted a finger width. For him, that's rearranging the furniture. Miss Prout? She swallowed. I work for Mrs. Vardell. I manage her schedule, her calls. I meet messengers at the door. I saw the first teapot. I didn't see who brought it. No one did. Clara's head came up with a little snap. Because there was no one, she said. It is someone in the house. Wolfe let the silence sit. You learn quickly in that room who grows itchy under silence, and who can take it like a mineral bath. Clara waited him out. Nella looked ready to apologize for being made of sound. Names, Wolfe said finally. Those who have handled the teapots and those who knew of them. Mr. Goodwin will write, I wrote. Household, maid, Anya, butler, Goddard, chef, on alternating nights, a man named Rizzo, because of course, driver, Hal Quinn, and a gardener who only came Tuesdays. Friends and fixtures. An art advisor, Arthur Lefebvre. A lawyer, Miles Portman. A charity director, Tamsin Reed. And a brother-in-law by the second husband, Jonah Cates. Nella added two more. A private yoga instructor and a photographer who was doing a book on lived interiors. Wolfe made a faint noise at the last one. You destroyed the notes, he said to Clara. Describe them. Plain typing paper, no watermark, neat block letters cut from magazines would have been an improvement. This was done on a cheap home printer. The phrasing was clipped like a child who had learned the word ruin before please. The second mentioned the thing in the drawer. The third, the afternoon on Marble Street. The fourth, yesterday, said, tomorrow you will. Bring an apology to Nero Wolfe. I scrawled. So the maid didn't invent the Wolfe angle, I said. It was part of the script. Yes. Clara's voice cooled. And when the maid returned because your vestibule was empty of packages, I told her to leave it on your stoop and come away. Within an hour, I had two detectives looking at me as if I'd smuggled in a bomb. Detectives are paid to look like that, I said. It keeps them off my back. Usually Wolfe inhaled, a deep, slow draw, as if the room had steeped and he was testing the strength. You do not want police involved beyond the minimum required, he said. Why? Clara didn't flinch. Because scandal eats slower when it dines in private, and because there is nothing to confess, Wolfe regarded her. He might have been staring at a chessboard with all the pawns disguised as bishops. You invited an intruder by attempting to ignore him. Now he comes and goes with impunity and announces his presence with porcelain. He has elected my house as a theater. He closed his eyes. You may engage me. Clara exhaled so faintly you might miss it if you didn't live on a steady diet of faint things. Thank you. The fee will be commensurate with the nuisance, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin will draw a receipt for a retainer of $10,000. You will return tomorrow at 11 with the maid and the butler. No one else. Meanwhile, you will make no public mention of this, and you will remove nothing from your drawers. Nella's hat moved. From her? Domestic drawers, Wolfe said without opening his eyes. Mr. Goodwin will explain. Archie, see Mrs. Vardell out? We did the coats? And they went. At the threshold, Clara paused and looked down at the vestibule tiles, at the teapot positioned like a small white animal waiting to be fed. She didn't stoop. She didn't touch it. When the outer door clicked shut and her heels faded, I went back to the office. Wolfe was where I'd left him, only now his gaze had inched left, toward the empty middle of the rug. Bring it, he said. I fetched the teapot with the handkerchief and set it on the floor between us, lid tilted, the little chip catching a thread of lamplight. Wolfe didn't glance at me. He regarded the thing as if it had spoken and he was giving it the dignity of finishing its sentence. Leave it there, he said. Overnight, let it declare what it is, which is what? A trespass that wants to be seen. He closed his eyes again, not to sleep, but to consider. And, perhaps, a poor imitation. I'm not a man to get spooky about overnight objects. If you leave a thing where you can step on it in the dark, you deserve your bruises and the lecture that follows. Still, when I came down at 8 and crossed the office, the teapot was where I'd set it. Center of the rug, lid a hair ajar, the chip under the spout catching a thread of mourning. Wolfe doesn't do mourning unless the orchids are involved, but he was already in the chair with a cup Fritz calls coffee and I call loam. He tilted his head at the pot, the way a heron might look at a pond, as if waiting for it to admit the fish. You rested? I asked. My rest is not the subject, he said. Turn it over. I went for the handkerchief. He doesn't like grease. On food he blesses it. On porcelain he calls it barbarism. I eased the lid off and showed him another absence inside. Then, at his grunt, I tipped it on its side and peered under the foot. The maker's mark said Alwyn and Reeve in a wreath. Embossed, cheap, new. I had to give him that. If you're going to threaten heiresses with tea, you should at least spring for a proper antique. Poor imitation, he said, and I gave him his own line back. We're agreed. 2 hands, he said, eyes closed, voice doing that soft roll that means the mill is grinding. One of taste, one of clumsy mimicry. Mrs. Vardell's intruder selected a symbol with care. Your visitor prefers theatre. Either that, or the original artist is out of town and we've got the understudy. I replaced the lid. At 11, we're expecting the maid and the butler. If they trip over it, do I give them points or take them away? Observe, he said. Do not interfere. If they touch it, note how we had eggs with tarragon and a lesson in patience. At 10:58, the bell announced punctual help. I did the door and brought in Clara with the accessories she'd promised. Maid and butler, each vibrating at a different pitch. The maid was a fair, quick-eyed girl with wrists like question marks. The butler was 60, with a face pressed into service by 30 years of seeing too much and saying too little. Clara nodded to the teapot, as if it were a person at a party she might have been introduced to once and had promptly forgotten. The butler didn't glance at it. The maid couldn't not. Miss Anya, Wolfe said when we had them arranged. Mr. Goddard, the butler corrected in a voice you'd use to adjust the hands of a clock. He wore gloves, pale grey, crusted at the seams with good habit. The maid twisted her fingers. Let's begin at the beginning, Wolfe said. You will tell me, each of you, where you were the mornings the objects arrived at Mrs. Vardell's house. Anya first. The maid took a breath. The first I found on the library table at 8:40. I was polishing the banister. I'd been in the foyer since 8:20. I had not opened the door. Mrs. Vardell had not come down. I went to the library because Mr. Goddard asked me for the newspaper scissors. I found the teapot. I called him. He came. He told me to be quiet. Goddard didn't blink. Wolfe turned to him. You told her to be quiet. I manage tone, he said. The household benefits when information travels through a single channel. Yours, I said. He didn't look at me. He would have made a swell lieutenant in a silent regiment. The second, Wolfe asked. The second was 3 days later, Anya said. Same hour. I'd gone into the breakfast room to open the drapes. When I returned, it was there. And the third, Mr. Goddard engaged a watchman for the foyer. He went upstairs at 9:50 to use the washroom. At 9:07 I went for the mail. At 9:09 it was there. Shock, I said. Truly, that the watchman would have a bladder. Goddard did a small conservative thing with his mouth that might, in a loose country, be called a frown. The lavatory is not adjacent. He should have asked for relief. Wolfe's gaze transferred to him. Keys? I have them. All of them? Yes. Except the ones you have lent, Wolfe said, and it wasn't a question. To whom? I do not lend keys. I waited. Wolfe waited longer. Goddard's breath had the measured cadence of a pipe organ. Clara's patience wore silk. It didn't scuff against anything. The driver had access to the garage entrance, I said friendly. Hal Quinn. Goddard looked at Clara. Not me. She lifted one shoulder a quarter inch. Hal has the garage fob, not the interior. Who has the interior? Wolfe asked. I do, Goddard said, and now the organ drew air. And Mrs. Vardell, of course. The yoga instructor, I asked. Does she inhale at 6 or at 10? 6, Anya said quick, but only in the sunroom. I lay out the mat. And the photographer, I added, who does lived interiors. Does he live in your drawers? Clara's mouth tightened. He was there 2 afternoons. He didn't wander. Mr. Lefebvre, my art advisor, was present. Marble Street, Wolfe said abruptly, and the room turned its head. Miss Anya, what is Marble Street to your employer? Anya flicked a glance at Clara. A shop, she said uncertain. Some years ago. A tea place. There were charity meetings there. Our tormentor's phrase, Wolfe told her. The afternoon on Marble Street. It is a crumb he expects her to follow back to his loaf. I don't, Anya began, and stopped. I don't know. Goddard's gloves touched at the fingertips. If I may, he said without altering his timbre, there is no benefit to rehearsing old gossip. Mrs. Vardell's charitable committees met in several places. There were afternoons in a dozen venues. True, Wolfe said, but not all afternoons require confession. Mr. Goddard, when locks were changed, who engaged the locksmith? I did. Who stood by? I did. Did you count the blanks and the cut keys? He didn't move. The silence climbed an inch. Yes. Did you replace the strike plates? Yes. When the second teapot came, what did you advise? Discretion, he said. We are targets for theatricality. Responding encourages repetition. Wolfe's nose said foo-I without involving his lips. This is not random showmanship. It is functional. It creates stage and prop. It flusters. It drives. It speaks. The question is, whose voice? Archie, I got it. I moved to the rug and rotated the teapot a quarter turn. Anya, I said, come take a look at the underside of the foot. What do you notice? She knelt without stepping onto the rug, house training, and peered. The felt dots, she said after a second. We put them on so the tables aren't marked. Ours are gray felt with a little ridge. These are flat and white. Goddard didn't react. Pink points rose on Anya's cheeks, though, as if she'd just declared the Pope a Lutheran. So, This isn't one of ours, she added, glancing up at Clara and back down. No, Wolfe said softly. It is not. He breathed once, deep, expanding his vest. The sequence is now this. Mrs. Vardell is needled with an object that belongs to her, meaningful to her. She deflects. The object continues. When she threatens to consult me, our provocateur anticipates and co-opts, sending a counterfeit to my house as an opening salvo. Badly counterfeit. He prints crude notes. He chooses a refined symbol. He has neither the patience to acquire a true match nor the taste to admit his lack. He is either pressed for time or he believes we will not know the difference. He opened his eyes. I always know the difference. Clara set her chin and didn't say thank you with her mouth. Wolfe turned back to Goddard. You told the maid to be quiet. You controlled access. You hired a watchman who needed relief. You changed the locks. You're a gate. Goddard inclined a fraction. I am. Gates are useful, Wolfe said. They also creak. Miss Anya, you will write for Mr. Goodwin the names of deliverymen and service providers who have entered the house in the last month. Mr. Goddard, the locksmith's firm, and the dates of work. You will both, before you leave, stand one at a time where you say you stood the mornings in question and recount, slowly, your movements. Mr. Goodwin will time you, and he will try your path. If he can get from foyer to breakfast room and back in the intervals you claim, we progress. If he cannot, we adjust. Anya nodded too fast. Goddard didn't nod at all. We did the little choreography in a hallway no one had expected to dance in. Anya's feet were quick and honest. Goddard's were measured and modest. We timed the lavatory detour, the mail, the drapes, the scissors, the summons. When we were done, Wolfe said, At 4 this afternoon, Mr. Goodwin will visit your house. Mrs. Vardell. He will look at the library drawer. He will also look at Marble Street. Clara's eyes sharpened. Marble Street is a ghost? All the better, Wolfe said. Ghosts have fewer alibis. They stood. Goddard's gaze fell for the first time on the teapot. It lasted a half-second, maybe less. He did a neat, almost involuntary thing with the angle of his right shoe. When they went, I crossed and looked down. The lid had seated a millimeter tighter, just enough to silence the rattle you wouldn't hear unless you were listening for it. He touched it, I said. He couldn't help himself, Wolfe replied. Managers manage. Put it back where it was. Then comb Marble Street for what calls itself an afternoon. And Archie, do not be seduced by gossip. Bring me facts and any man who treats porcelain like scripture. At 4, I took a cab uptown with the kind of driver who thinks a yellow light is a personal insult. Wolfe had given me his usual farewell. Bring me facts. Which is his way of saying he intends to spend the next 3 hours not moving any muscle that isn't strictly conversational. I rang at Clara Vardell's, got sifted by a vestibule that thought well of itself, and was decanted into the library by Goddard, who managed to look like a man with no pores. The drawer, I said. He indicated a partner's desk, broad enough to park a bicycle on. Anya hovered in the doorway, fingers making a braid of air. The second note mentioned the thing in the drawer, I said, pulling the chair. No one touches anything while I prod. If something squirms, it's on me. Goddard didn't answer. Anya swallowed. The drawer had a false bottom that was not ambitious. Whoever added it trusted gentlemen to be lazy or librarians to be pious. The lining paper was cut clean but refixed with glue too fresh to be from the Roosevelt administration. I lifted the paper edge with a bone folder from the blotter tray. If you don't know why I carry one, you haven't watched Wolfe look at fingerprints, and eased the board. Below, dust settled in a polite rectangle around a bare patch the size of a thick envelope. Dust tells the truth. It can't afford not to. Empty now, I said. Recently not empty. Did the police pour this? No, Goddard said. He'd moved a half-step closer without admitting to motion. "Then someone did, after the second note," I said. "Miss Anya, when did you last clean this drawer?" "I don't," she said. "Only the surfaces." "Mr. Goddard keeps the desk. Managers manage," I said. "What lived down there?" Clara had come in while I was lifting the false bottom and stood by the mantel, chin level. "Correspondence that predates Nella," she said. "Clippings I kept for a committee report. Receipts that no longer mattered." "Did one of them matter to someone else?" I asked. "Apparently," she said evenly. "I dug for crumbs. Literally. There was a grain of something under the lip of the panel. Felt lint, grey, flattened with a ridge. I held it up between thumb and bone folder and looked at Goddard. His lids agreed it was lint and nothing more. Anya recognized it first. "From the table feet," she said. "Quick! We put those dots on." "They shed when they're old, and the cheap counterfeit that came to my house wears white flat dots," I said. "Different species of moth." "Who handles the felt?" "I do," Goddard said. "It is ordered in rolls." "From?" "A houseware supplier," he said, and named a place on Lexington that sells everything from cake stands to candles for women who enjoy saying votive. "We keep a stock." "Good," I said. "Keep not losing any." I replaced the board and the paper, left the drawer as honest as I'd found it, and did a slow lap of the room. The library was daytime serious. Bound sets that had been curated more than read, an oriental rug that had met more shoes than toes, and a case of porcelain that would make the average teapot feel unworthy. On a side table sat an actual Alwyn and Reeve, real, not cheap, older line with finer glaze, grey felt dots, a family resemblance to the intruder's taste. I didn't touch. I let my eyes weigh. "Hal Quinn around?" I asked. "In the mews," Clara said. We found him in the little cobbled side court, leaning against a black sedan like he'd invented internal combustion. He had a hat that wanted to be streetwise and a grin that had met mirrors. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I hear you're taking tea with our betters." "Only if the cup doesn't leak," I said. "You run errands beyond the wheel." "If they pay," he said, "and sometimes when they don't." "You hauled anything recently with a teapot on the box?" He snorted. "Half the stuff from that Lexington place has teapots on the box. Goddard gets felt and polish and nonsense. The missus gets candles. The art guy, Lefebvre, had me pick up a parcel there last week. Thin box, light. He said it was a display stand. For what?" "Something white," Hal said, and made a little hollow with his hands. "I don't ask. I carry." Then I shut up. "Do you?" I asked, pleasant. "Where'd you take it?" "Back door," he said. He was early for an appointment. "The librarian room." He was pleased with himself. He has that kind of face. "He also has taste," I said, "which can be a disability." Hal grinned. "I wouldn't know." I left him petting the fender and went to Marble Street, which is one of those lanes that think history can be rented by the month. The tea room was a memory under a Pilates studio that smelled like lemon holiness. Next door, a tailor had been patching better men than me for 40 years. He had time to talk because he was basting a lapel and a memory at the same pace. "The Willow and Wren," he said when I mentioned tea. "Closed 3 years. The lady who owned it, Madame Bouchard, she has a booth now in a consignment place on 9th. Afternoon." He rolled the word around like a button. There was an afternoon. Ladies with lists, pretty coats. Someone broke a cup. There was an argument. I remember that because it was quiet after that for a long time. "Who argued?" I asked. "The one with the straight back," he said, head cocked. "Your patroness." And another with a short laugh. He made the sound, a clipped ho, and it wasn't friendly. And a man with a scarf. He made pictures of their hands. He said it was art. He owed me for a hem Hands, I said. He wasn't photographing the china. China bores men like that, the tailor said, not unkindly. He likes pose. Tamsin Reed, I asked, and he nodded at the name like it fit the laugh. The man with the scarf. He said he was making a book, the tailor said. He had a card with a square on it. Modern, I let him baste and took a cab to 9th. Found Madame Bouchard presiding over a rococo of things her store didn't deserve, and bought a cup I didn't want to earn the right to ask questions. She had the gaze of a woman who had poured for people who don't say when. The afternoon, she said, after I finished being polite. Yes, we closed early. I do not close early unless there is a need. There were papers. The committee had brought envelopes they wished me to keep for them until the end of the month. I have a drawer. I am not a bank, but I am a decent person. She lifted a hand. When they left, I counted. One envelope was missing. I called Mrs. Reed. She told me not to be dramatic. Then she came back with a man. Later, another envelope was added. Different paper. I'm not a chemist, but I am also not blind. Who came back with Mrs. Reed? I asked. The lawyer. He had the manner of a man who believes manners are owed to him. He used his voice like it was a stamp. I didn't like him in my shop, Miles Portman, I said. Names do not improve people, she said. They left. The next week, my rent was raised. I moved. There is your story. You didn't see who took the envelope? No, she said. In a room full of ladies, hands are always moving. There was also a man with a camera. He take pictures of your drawer? She smiled without kindness. He took pictures of Mrs. Vardell's ring I paid for the cup and for the story, which were not the same price, and called Wolfe from a corner where the city pretends it has privacy. 2 bits, I said when Fritz put him on. 1. The drawer in Clara's library had a false bottom and a fresh emptiness. Goddard manages and likes keys. 2. Marble Street had an afternoon that ended with a missing envelope, then a replacement with different paper. Tamsin Reed returned with Portman to smooth ruffled feathers, or ruffle them neatly. A photographer caught hands and rings like a magpie. Also, Hal Quinn says Lefebvre bought a thin box at the housewares place, possibly a stand for something white. Wolfe said. 2 hands indeed. Which hands belonged to which body? The clumsy counterfeit that invaded my house. Smells of a gatekeeper who thinks he is subtle, he said. The original theatre in Mrs. Vardell's library used her own belongings and her own history. That voice knows her. It may be Miss Reed's zeal, Mr. Portman's officiousness, or Mr. Lefebvre's aesthetics. Or all braided, you want me to tug which strand first. Begin with the photographer, he said. Men who make a profession of looking sometimes see what they should not. If he has the negatives of that afternoon, he has leverage or a liability. Either will make him talk. Then go to Mr. Portman and watch him insist on telling you nothing. He will tell you more than he wants. And the thing in the drawer was proof, Wolfe said, of a pledge or a betrayal disguised as a pledge. I don't yet care which. What I care about is who needed it gone now. Return here at 8. Bring me 1 photograph of a hand reaching toward a drawer and the name of the person who taught Mr. Goddard to shop for Whitefelt. The photographer lived in a loft that had never seen an honest sweep with a broom. His name was Clement Dyer, which sounded respectable until you stepped inside and got a load of the chaos. Cameras leaned against chairs, tripods formed small steel forests, and strips of developed negatives hung like laundry across the ceiling beams. The air smelled of chemical baths and somebody's idea of incense, as though art could be bottled and burned. He wore a shirt that had once been white and hair that had never been told what to do, and he looked me over like I was an inconvenient reflection in a dirty mirror. "You're from Wolfe," he said. It wasn't a question. It was the kind of conclusion photographers like to reach when they think they see through people. Archie Goodwin, I told him, giving him the grin that tends to soften hard cases. Wolfe wants to know about Marble Street. He froze a fraction, then gave me a smile that was too quick to belong to anyone relaxed. Ah, the tea room. That was years ago. I barely remember. Why stir up old saucers? Because somebody's using porcelain like ransom notes, I said, letting my eyes drift to the negatives. And because your name came up as the guy who made art out of ladies' fingers. That cracked him. He laughed, sharp and brittle. You sound like Reed. Always accusing me of fetishizing hands. They're expressive. Hands tell more than faces, maybe. But I'm interested in what those hands were holding, or reaching for, or taking. Specifically, on an afternoon where one envelope went missing and another came back. He walked to a light table and started shuffling through contact sheets. His fingers trembled only when he thought I wasn't looking. I don't get rid of my work. Some of it the clients don't want to see twice. But I keep copies. For my records. For artistic continuity. He paused, found a strip, and slid it across to me with the care of a dealer who knows the chips are worth more than his smile. The photo was grainy but clear enough. A library table, an envelope half exposed from a drawer, and a hand hovering above it. A ring glinted on the index finger. Not Clara's, hers I'd memorized from half a dozen flashes that day, but another, heavier, square-cut stone with a man's thickness. Portman, I asked. Dyer tilted his head. You said that, not me. I pocketed the sheet. Who paid you to be there? Reed, he said. She wanted the committee documented. She said charity needed faces. I gave her hands. She wasn't pleased. Portman wanted the negatives destroyed. I said no. He threatened me. I said art was immortal, and you still have them. Smart or suicidal? Both, he said with a little bow. They paid my rent that month. Still I left him before he could start quoting poetry and called Wolfe from a corner payphone that smelled of 5 years of stale cigarettes. Hands, I said when he came on. I've got a strip showing one that isn't Clara's. Heavy ring, square stone. Portman wanted the negatives gone. Dyer said no. Reed commissioned them but didn't like the results. Good, Wolfe said. Bring it. Then go to Portman. He will sweat under his collar and call you insolent. You will listen when Wolfe uses good. It's not a compliment. It's a marker. I pocketed the film and headed to Portman's office, which had too much mahogany and too little soul. The secretary, a woman with eyes that had already filed me under nuisance, waved me through after a short wait. Portman stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back like he'd invented authority. Goodwin, he said, turning slowly. I was expecting Wolfe to send a dog, not a jackal. I bite either way, I said pleasantly, taking a seat without being invited. You've got a taste for drawers. Specifically, ones with envelopes that don't belong to you. His face darkened. I don't know what ridiculous stories you've heard, but I assure you. Save the bluster, I said. I've got a photo of your hand reaching into Clara Vardell's drawer. Heavy ring, can't miss it. That drawer's still got a ghost in it, Portman, and it's humming your tune. He stiffened. For a lawyer, he didn't do his poker face any favors. Those images are inadmissible. Illegally obtained. Wolfe doesn't care about admissible. He cares about truth. Why did you want Dyer's negatives destroyed? Portman moved to his desk, shuffled papers like they'd save him, then leaned forward. Because he was exploiting a private meeting. Because Reed made a poor choice hiring him. Because he broke off, realizing he was digging with the wrong shovel. Those envelopes were trivial. Receipts. Nothing worth remembering. Receipts that got replaced with new paper, I said. You went back with Reed to tidy up, didn't you? Only the tidy was messier than the original. He pressed his lips thin. You have no proof. Proof is Wolfe's department, I said, standing. "But I can tell you this, whoever's planting porcelain has a reason to push Clara toward confession. Maybe about that afternoon. Maybe about what was in the envelope you borrowed. You might want to check your own drawers, Portman. Wolfe doesn't like people pawing around in them." He sputtered something about slander as I left. I didn't bother to answer. Back at the brownstone, I laid the contact sheet on Wolfe's desk. He didn't touch it. He stared at the image, the hand, the ring. Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and made the faintest noise in his throat. "Not theft," he said finally. "Exchange. One document for another. Mrs. Vardell was a pawn, the others played. Reed for zeal, Portman for concealment, perhaps Lefevre for craft. And now someone resurrects it to demand a confession from her that was never hers to make." "Which means?" I asked. "Which means," he said, "that the guilty man requires her to carry the burden while he escapes. That is cowardice, and cowardice has a stench. It is in this house now, Archie, is in my vestibule, parading as porcelain." The bell rang then, sharp and urgent. I got up fast, but Wolfe's voice stopped me at the door. "Carefully," he said. "If it is another teapot, Archie, do not assume it is empty." I opened the door like it might argue back. The stoop was empty except for a white shape centered on the tiles with the precision of a surveyor. It looked the same breed as the others, but when I bent, handkerchief first, and lifted the lid a whisper, there was the quiet give of weight and a soft slosh against porcelain. Wolfe's warning about not assuming emptiness was in my ears. I didn't jerk. I set the lid, eased my grip to the handle, and carried it in like a waiter who wanted his job tomorrow. Wolfe had angled his chair to face the hall. If he'd been a cat, he would have had the tail curl that means interest without concession. I put the pot on the small brass tray we keep for callers who bring objects we don't want to marry, and waited. "Smell," he said. I bent, cautious. Not gas, not cordite. A faint leaf sour, bergamot and dust. I slid the lid aside another hair and looked. Floating on a finger of water were two neat circles of felt. One grey with that little ridge we'd seen under Clara's better porcelain. One flat and white like the cheap stand-in at our place. Plus a slip of paper in waxed paper wrap to keep the water honest. I fished it with tweezers. The slip was a sales receipt torn across the bottom third. Housewares, Lexington. Line items, felt pads. White half-inch, 1 roll. Display stand, ceramic. White, 1 unit. 2 signatures for pickup. One was a crisp Goddard. The other, a loop with a flourish, a Lefevre. "Pfui," Wolfe said, but it had. Layers, contempt for clumsy embroidery, and respect for the impulse. "A syllogism in felt." "Somebody wants us to connect the dots," I said, because he would have if I hadn't. "Someone wants us to see what he sees," Wolfe corrected. "Which is more dangerous." He sent a glance to the phone. "Saul." I dialed. Saul Panzer answers like the line is an oath. I told him quickly, the parade of porcelain, the felt exhibit A and B, the receipt with 2 familiar names. "On it," he said. "You want to sit on your stoop, or you want motion?" "Both," I said, and covered the mouthpiece. "Wolfe?" "Mr." "Panzer will be across the street," Wolfe said. "He will collect faces rather than teapots. Meanwhile, he will find Mr. Lefevre and Mr. Goddard. He will see where their feet go after dark." I relayed it. Saul didn't waste words. He said, "Right," and breathed off the line. Fritz appeared in the doorway with a look that on him counted as distress. "Mr. Wolfe, the jar of marjoram was set on the floor by the stove," he said, as if reporting sacrilege in a small church. "I did not put it there." Wolfe's head came half an inch. "When did you find it?" "Just now. I went to fetch bay leaves. It was there, upright, but not where I keep it." I went with Fritz to the kitchen. Even if you don't know herbs, you could know Fritz's arrangement by how proud it makes him. A jar out of place in that sanctum was as subtle as a slap. On the threshold tile, catching the light in a way gravity wouldn't have arranged, was a single grey felt dot, thin with age, with a little ridge. I pointed. Fritz made a sound in his throat that could have been a prayer. I brought the dot back in a fold of paper. Wolfe didn't touch it. He looked at it like it had made a confession. "Not ours," he said. "Not the counterfeits. Mrs. Vardell's. What are the constraints by which a man deposits such a thing in my kitchen?" "Constraint 1, I said. "He's been in the house." "Constraint 2, he's not a delivery boy." "Constraint 3, he knows what a threshold is." "Good," Wolfe murmured. "Not good news, but good thought. He wants me to know he can trespass. He puts the jar on the floor to harmonize with his motif. He thinks in echoes. That narrows the field. Lefebvre thinks in echoes," I said. "He buys display stands that hold white ceramic. He choreographs rooms. He sends the driver for props. Goddard manages thresholds and likes to believe he leaves none of himself behind. But he sheds felt or is made to shed it," Wolfe said. "Do not be hustled, Archie. A framed man can be precisely framed." He pressed the bell. Fritz reappeared, composed, because that's his profession. "Fritz, no one enters this kitchen tonight without Mr. Goodwin or me seeing him do it. If Inspector Kramer appears, you will say the stove is closed." Fritz bowed and withdrew. The phone rang before Wolfe could rearrange a thought. I took it. Clement Dyer came in raw, like a nerve that had met a file. "They've been here," he said. "I went out to get cigarettes." 10 minutes. I come back. The place smells like a pond and the fixed trays are on the floor. "The Marble Street negatives are gone, Goodwin. Not all, but the strip with the hand at the drawer, and 5 others. Whoever it was knew what to take." "See him?" I asked. "I saw a sleeve, that's all, because I heard the stair creak and went up 2 at a time like a hero. Blue worsted. Good cloth. Glove on the hand. The man was quick and he didn't panic. He slid down the fire escape instead of bolting for the hall." "Face?" "No. There was a scarf on his neck. He smelled like soap, not sweat. He left a footprint in Fixer, if that's a consolation." "Is it the same size as a conscience?" I said, to give him a little anchor. "Call the precinct if you want to be official. Then sit on your hands. If anyone calls to buy what's left, don't sell. If anyone calls to threaten, tell him you'll call me first." He exhaled like he was remembering how. "Right," I told Wolfe. He patted air once, a gesture he uses to keep the universe where it is. "Mr. Portman will say he was in conference," he said. "Mr. Lefebvre will say he was at a gallery. Mr. Goddard will say he was inventorying napkins. None of them will mention a scarf unless asked." He glanced at the teapot. "We are being accelerated." "If the negatives are gone, Dyer's leverage is gone," I said. "That helps Portman." "It helps anyone who wanted to edit the past," Wolfe said. "But he is sloppy. He leaves the scent of soap and the trace of taste. If Mr. Goddard wears gloves, they are grey. If Mr. Lefebvre wears a scarf, it is never purely for warmth. If Mr. Portman runs, he runs to erase paper. Each of them is consistent in his vices." The bell rang again, softer this time, as if someone shy had decided to be brave. I went, keeping my shoulder ready and my handkerchief ahead of me. No visitor, no scurry down the steps. Only an envelope on the mat. Thick, unsealed, with my name in block letters that wanted to look like a stranger's hand. I brought it to Wolfe. He pointed, and I opened it with a knife. Inside were 3 items. A glossy contact print of a woman's hand with a ring I recognized as Clara's, fingers splayed above a table, a scrap torn from lined paper with Marble Street, written 3 times like a school punishment, and a typed strip, "Confess or we confess for you." "Who is we?" I asked the room. Cowards always pluralize, Wolfe said. It dilutes the self. He tapped the contact print with a fingernail. This is not Dyer's paper. The border is trimmed too close. A copy of a copy. Someone is playing with reproductions. He cannot get at the negative, so he manufactures a likeness. He breathed slow. Archie, make 2 calls. First, Saul, tell him the scarf. Second, Mrs. Vardell. Tell her to send Miss Reed and Mr. Portman here at 11 tomorrow, and to bring nothing but their candor. Say also that Mr. Lefebvre is to join them at noon. We will not mix them. Let each think himself alone in his guilt for an hour. And Goddard? Mr. Goddard can stew, Wolfe said. He's the kind of man who salts his own pot when you aren't looking. I went to the phone. Saul said, "Got it," to scarf and worsted, and promised me a seat in the theatre across the street before midnight. When I called Clara, Nella answered, voice thin, and handed the receiver. Clara agreed without music. When I named names and times, there was a pause shaped like satisfaction. Good, she said. Don't get ahead of the picture, I told her. Someone's staging new ones as fast as we can dry the old. Then stop them, she said, and hung up. I stood with the deadline in my hand and looked at Wolfe. He shut his eyes and breathed in, then out, the way he does when he draws a line through a plan and writes another above it. Our visitor thinks he has discovered symbol and ceremony, he murmured. He imagines himself a priest of porcelain. Tomorrow we will show him what a true rite is. Saul phoned at 10:15, which for him is practically sunrise. 2 notes, he said, like he was handing me a menu. Lefebvre left his building at 9 with a tube under his arm and a scarf that could pick a fight in a confessional. Met Reed at a cafe on 73rd. They traded. She slid him a small white box, size of a jewelry case, but lighter. He passed her something rolled. They did not linger. He went east. She went south. Second, at 1:09, a gentleman in a dark overcoat stood across from your stoop for 90 seconds, checked his watch, and approached the door. Gloved. He touched the knob once. Gentle, then walked on as if he'd decided he had the wrong address. Height? 5'11" with posture, Saul said. Walk like a man who has opinions about umbrella stands. Goddard, I said. Could be, Saul allowed. Could be a lawyer with control issues. Neither one leaves shoe prints unless invited. We left the teapot on the brass tray like a white animal we were teaching not to jump. Fritz did not sleep. He simmered. At 8, I made the Lexington run. The houseware's place had aisles of honest junk made noble by women with checkbooks. The clerk was a wiry man who loved receipts more than people. Goddard, he said when I showed the copy. Exact change, always. Grey gloves, never smiles. Prefers the good felt with the ridges, orders by stock number. Comes monthly. And this one? I pointed to the loopy flourish. Lefebvre. He buys stands, the clerk said. White, matte. Asks for the angle that flatters porcelain. Once wanted black border paper for prints. Said he liked an image to feel framed even before it's framed. Very artistic gentleman. He argued with me about glaze types like I was Meissen. I thanked him for his devotion to civilization and took a cab home. Wolfe was already angled to the room like a planet deciding whether to acknowledge a moon. I gave him Saul's report and the clerk's aria. He closed his eyes and divided. Mr. Lefebvre arranges and admires. Miss Reed deploys. Mr. Portman removes. Mr. Goddard controls. Each performs his nature. Our task is to make each do it where we can see. So we set the stage, I said. Yes, he murmured. The prop remains on the floor. At 11 sharp, Tamsin Reed arrived with a mouth set for a cause. She was the kind of woman who writes checks with moral ink and expects them to clear in people. She took 2 steps into the office and stopped dead when she saw the teapot occupying the rug's bullseye. Really? She said, with the kind of disapproval that polishes silver. Is this a ritual now? It is a test of locomotion, Wolfe said. Whether you can walk around a thing you don't approve of without moving it. She moved it. Not far, 3 inches to the left, like a hostess straightening a crooked place card. Her fingers lifted the lid a fraction and set it back, firm as if to end a subject's talking. Wolfe watched her hands, not her face. "Miss Reed," he said when she sat. "The afternoon on Marble Street." She put her bag on her knees and a history in her eyes. "Mrs. Vardell chaired a pledge circle, a dozen of us. We had donors' envelopes we intended to keep sealed until we counted together. An envelope went missing. I handled it. I handled all of it. Portman said not to involve the police. We were protecting donors. We reconstructed from copies made when?" She hesitated a breath. "After. So the replacement was written to resemble what you wished had been pledged," Wolfe said mildly. "Who made the copies?" "Portman drafted language," she said. "Goddard fetched stationery from the house because it matched. Lefebvre suggested the presentation for the donor wall. I managed the accounting. We were efficient because we had to be. I would do it again." She looked at me then, as if daring me to write down her conscience. "The missing envelope," I said. "Whose?" "Anonymous," she said, which is a coward's way to be generous, but also protective. The card inside had a number code. "I despise anonymity. It invites mischief." "Yet you chose to replace rather than admit loss," I said. "To save a program," she snapped. "Do you prefer hungry families, Mr. Goodwin?" "We didn't steal. We restored." "You restored something you thought should exist," Wolfe said. "Theology, not bookkeeping. And you placed the moral load on Mrs. Vardell." "She chaired," she said. "Responsibility accrues upward." "Responsibility, yes," Wolfe said. "Confession to a crime she did not commit? No." The notes that harry her now are not about charity. They are about shame. "Whose?" She didn't flinch. I'll give her that. "If Portman took the envelope to see what was inside, it was for the committee," she said, cool. "If Goddard handled paper, it was at my instruction. If Lefebvre beautified, it was in keeping with our mission. If Mrs. Vardell had secured her drawer." Wolfe sighed, not deeply. "You move teapots you did not place. You move figures you did not pledge. You move blame you did not earn. Thank you he did not ring." He looked at me and I stood. Tamsin rose, bristling, and I brought her coat. As she passed the rug, she nudged the pot back toward center with the toe of her shoe, the way you dignify an object you just disrespected. She caught me seeing it and lifted her chin. She had not been out of the vestibule 60 seconds when Portman arrived, punctual as a subpoena. He took one step into the office and barked, "What is this doing on the floor?" He didn't ask permission. He stooped, grasped the handle, and reached for the lid in the practiced way of a man who expects contents to be his business. Wolfe's eyelids did a slow lift. "Leave it," he said, and Portman left it, but resentfully, like he had yielded to a judge he intended to appeal. We sat. He went straight to righteousness. I'm tired of being menaced by some warehouse of photographs. Dyer is an extortionist with a dark room. "Mr. Dyer was robbed last night," I said. "Someone wearing blue worsted and a scarf took the strips that embarrass your ring. Did your conscience sleep well?" His color rose. "I was at the club." "Which club?" Wolfe inquired. "And with which alibi?" He gave names. They were the sort that sign plaques. Wolfe didn't write them. "Explain the missing envelope," Wolfe said. "Clerical error," he said. "A volunteer misplaced it. We reconstructed for tallying purposes and awaited the donor's confirmation to regularize the record. Nothing nefarious occurred." He pinched his fingertips together. "Wolfe, If your client thinks she can launder her own indiscretions by hiring you to paint halos on her friends, "Pfui," Wolfe said gently. "You're not her friend." He blinked. For a man who liked the upper hand, he wasn't used to having it set on his. "You substituted," Wolfe said. "You did it with Miss Reed's zeal and Mr. Goddard's keys. Whether you meant harm is temporarily irrelevant. But someone has decided to write a liturgy around your original sin, and he has selected porcelain as his sacrament. I do not like his mass being said in my house. Identify him." "I don't know what you're talking about," Portman said, but the starch had seeped out. He stood too quickly. "This is an absurd theater." "Indeed," Wolfe said, "and you have been a featured player." He didn't move. "Go." Portman went. The door had barely sighed shut when Saul called again. "Add one," he said. "Blue worsted walked past your stoop at 11:45 while I was nuzzling a newspaper." He didn't stop. He looked. He had a scarf. He tucked it like a man who doesn't like the wind to touch him. "Lefebvre," I said. "Maybe," Saul said. "Or a man who wants to be seen as Lefebvre." "Noon?" "Noon," I said, and hung up. Lefebvre came on the dot, smelling of expensive humility. He saw the teapot and smiled at it as at a model who had done nothing wrong. He didn't touch it. He adjusted his own cuff instead, a small, deft gesture. "Charming," he said. Symbolism on the floor. How on trend Wolfe did not smile. "Sit," he said. "Tell me about beauty and lies." Lefebvre's smile was the kind you hang in a hallway so the guests think you're civilized. He crossed his knees with a little choreography and gave the teapot the kind of look a curator gives an object he didn't select. Amused, condescending, possibly jealous. "Beauty and lies," he repeated, smoothing a cuff. "That's a large parish." "Which sermon?" "The one preached on Marble Street," Wolfe said. "Begin with your presence there." He steepled his fingers and watched the steeple. Miss Reed wanted a record. She overestimates posterity. I attended, I arranged chairs, I adjusted a vase that was arguing with a beam of light. A photographer wandered and did what they do, pretend to witness, actually intrude. I told him hands would say more than faces. He listened, for once. "You commissioned him?" I asked. "No, Miss Reed did. I recommended him, which is not the same as owning his sins." He looked at me and back to Wolfe. "If you require an aesthetic defense, I can write you one. If you require a moral one, you'll have to fetch it from someone who believes good taste and good share a root." Wolfe's lids lowered. The envelope. His smile cooled. "An embarrassment, the anonymous kind. We reconstructed. Not forgery, repair." "You repaired with stock that matched the house," I said. "Paper from Mrs. Vardell's desk, language from Portman, presentation from you." He adjusted his scarf. Blue worsted suit, soft wool at the throat. His fingers were careful, like he was straightening a frame. "We presented generosity as it should have been presented," he said. "It's not a crime to shape perception. It's what civilization is." "Civilization didn't ask you to break into a dark room," I said. He met my eyes. He had the look of a man who has practiced sincerity and can get it on the first take. "I was not in any dark room." "Yet you smell faintly of a pond," Wolfe murmured, not as an accusation, but as a botanical note. "Fixer. Also, the scarf is spotted." He pointed with his eyes, not a finger. On the underside of the fold, near his collarbone, a pale freckle had dried, silvered where the light took it. He didn't check. A man like that doesn't look at his own scarf when told. "I passed a park," he said lightly. "On a fire escape?" I asked. He considered whether to be annoyed and decided it would crease something. "If someone has chosen to burgle a photographer's past, it isn't me. I wouldn't risk my hands on a ladder made of rust." Wolfe didn't argue because he doesn't with air. He changed directions without moving. "The housewares shop on Lexington?" "The stands." "Of course," he said. "White shows, white is white." Display is justice. You don't want porcelain to beg for notice. You want it to assume it. He flicked his gaze at the teapot. That's not an Alwyn and Reeve I would choose. Why? Wolfe asked. The proportion of the spout, he said instantly. It leans forward like a bad listener. The glaze is thin, the foot is clumsy, and there should be grey felt on the feet with a ring in the centre, not those vulgar flat things. Whoever aped the original didn't know where to stop. He smiled, proud of a correct answer he hadn't been asked to give. Your hand at the tea room, I said. You were the man with the scarf. I am the man with the scarf most days, he said. They warm the throat and suggest attention. If you're going to accuse me of everything my neck has seen, this will be a long morning. Wolfe made a small, permissive motion, the kind you use to let a child show off a trick. Humour me, he said. Place that object as you would for a donor's table. Not a millimetre more gladly, he said, rising with a precision that left his chair unrumpled. He bent, not stooping, curving, and set 2 fingers to the handle, 2 to the lid. He didn't lift. He pivoted. He turned the pot so the spout looked toward the office door, not the desk, and with his thumb he settled the lid a whisper deeper. Then he drew the brass tray's edge into alignment with the rug's border, one clean line meeting another like he was preventing an argument. He didn't add anything. He didn't steal anything. But when he straightened, I got a small whiff of that chemical sour again, and saw, on his right thumbnail, a crescent the color of old milk. He followed my eyes and smiled, almost pleased. Pigment, he said. I was at a gallery. Is your gallery on 9th, 3 floors up a fire escape? I asked. A gallery is where good light is, he said. Sometimes that is 3 floors up. Good day, Mr. Wolfe. Please rescue Mrs. Vardell from her persecutors. They diminish my faith in patrons. He moved to the door. At the threshold, he glanced down, as everyone does, at the vestibule tiles. He didn't touch the knob with the pad of his glove. He used the side, habit, economy, or conscience. The scarf tucked closer to his throat as if it liked him. I watched him to the stoop and took a breath on the way back in. Wolfe was looking at the spout, pointing at the door. An exhibitionist, he said, but with better discipline than our kitchen trespasser. He's our scarf, I said. Possibly, Wolfe allowed, or our scarf was borrowed. He would lend his taste if you flatter it. He might even lend it to a lie he believes is elegant. The phone rang, and I got Saul. Our photographer just got a call, he said. Voice measured, no filler words, no ums. Asked if he would like to sell what remains for the good of the community. Offered to take custody of sensitive ephemera and return the rest. Promised a receipt. Goddard, I said. Could be, Saul agreed. Could also be Portman with his tie too tight, but the diction had starch. The call originated from a private club landline. My friend says it's the sort that still believes in brandy at noon. Portman, I said. Perhaps, Wolfe said when I relayed it, but Mr. Goddard uses the plural when he wishes to be important. We as in the house. Mr. Portman uses we as in my firm. Each is a banner. He put his fingertips together and looked at the tray line against the rug. They are all here, Archie. The zealot who repairs with righteousness, the lawyer who edits with authority, the adviser who polishes with appetite, the gatekeeper who preserves with control. They are all innocent in their own telling. Only one is writing notes. Lefebvre likes theatre, I said. Goddard likes thresholds. Portman likes custody. Reed likes cause. The notes tell Clara to confess. Confess to whose sin? Not theirs, Wolfe said, and not hers. The author is a man dissatisfied with having done his wrong invisibly. He wants an audience. The photographer's call, I said. Only a man who wants a clean shelf asks to put the negatives in custody instead of just burning them. Quite, Wolfe said. And a man who approves of a clean shelf will approve of a clean vestibule. Something itched. I went to the hall and opened the inner door. The tiles looked the way they always look when we have not been invaded. Clean, unargumentative, smug. Then my eyes cut left. The umbrella stand. Fritz's pride, because it can hold 5 and never shows a drip, was turned exactly a quarter to the right. Fritz does not do quarters. I bent and touched the rim. On the inner lip a tiny smear waited, pale and tacky. I sniffed. Not pond, not polish. Paste, like the sort you use to mount a print that doesn't want to stay flat. I brought the rim stain in on my fingertip for Wolfe's nose. He didn't need it. Someone staged our threshold while Mr. Lefebvre was in the room, he said, and did it before we could look. Either he brought it on himself, or someone loves his grammar enough to imitate it. The stand, I said. A white one. Tomorrow, he said, we will have a gathering. Today we will have a rehearsal. He leaned his head back and shut his eyes. Call Mrs. Vardell, ask for Mr. Goddard. Tell him he is to attend at 2 o'clock with Miss Prout. Tell him the subject is household custodianship and that the object will be on the floor. Use those words. He will come to guard what he thinks is his. And if he brings a scarf? I asked. Then he is vain, Wolfe said, and we can stop flattering Mr. Lefebvre. He opened his eyes and looked at the pot, the spout toward the door, the tray's edge exactly on the line. Archie, before 2 o'clock, go to the kitchen, choose one of Fritz's tea tins and set it on the threshold tile. If our visitor must move what does not belong on the floor, he will not be able to resist moving that too. Watch how he does it. Taste announces itself in motion. Fritz didn't like lending me the tin. He handed it over the way a priest passes a relic to a boy who's prone to dropping things. I chose a squat black one with a label that said Lapsang in Fritz's script, which is clear enough to pass for print. I set it dead center on the vestibule tile seam where the light makes a cross in the afternoon, then stepped back into the hall and left the inner door ajar an inch. There's a spot in the office where the glass of the framed patent on Wolfe's wall, one of those legal ornaments he keeps for fun, catches the vestibule at an angle. If you know where to stand, you can watch a man correct a household without him knowing the household is watching back. At 1:59, the bell figured it would be punctual, and so did Goddard. He arrived with Miss Prout a half step behind and a quarter lighter in color. He was in the same gray gloves, the kind you could use to pick up a moth and leave its wings on. He took one look at the tin and paused like a traffic cop, deciding whether to ticket a bicycle. Then he did what I had hoped he'd do. He didn't pick it up. He didn't kick. He slid it with the side of his shoe, heel first, a tidy shove that moved it just enough to break the cross of light, and tucked the tin against the baseboard where Fritz keeps an umbrella in the wet months. Then, because his eye can't abide a fractional wrong, he reached down and squared the umbrella stand a breadth to the left. The glove didn't touch the rim. It touched the side, just where paste had left its little tack yesterday. He moved like a man correcting his own obituary. I stepped into the hall and said hello. He didn't jump. Managers don't. Miss Prout managed a smile and made the mistake of glancing at the door where the teapot's shadow came and went, depending on how you breathe. I brought them into the office. Wolfe was arranged to suggest he had been carved there, which is his default way of being. Household custodianship, he said, making it sound like a rank in a small army. We will have a few minutes of it. Goddard sat on the edge of the red chair without creasing it. Miss Prout stood at the rug's limit, hands resting on the back of the visitor's chair as if that counted as being seated. Keys, mister. Goddard, Wolfe said. We begin again. You have the interior. Who else has ever had them? No one, he said. Except when you were helping Miss Reed restore a ledger, Wolfe said, mild. Except when you provided matching paper. Except when you told a maid to be quiet. except when you coordinated locksmiths and watchmen and brought felt to feet and stands to tables. You are an editor of spaces. I am a butler, he said, with a dignity that had iron filings in it. Those are not mutually exclusive, Wolfe said. Miss Prout, please. Write us a sentence. He slid a blank card toward her and a pencil. Confess, or we confess for you. She blinked twice. Is that necessary? It is useful, Wolfe said. We are discussing diction. She wrote small and neat and without loops, the way you write when you've been told not to waste ink. She centered the sentence on the card without measuring. She slid it back. Wolfe didn't pick it up. He looked at where it sat on the desk and then at her hands. You write like you file, he said. Exact. You do not pluralize yourself idly. I don't pluralize, she said. You don't say we when you mean I. Mr. Goddard does. We prefer. We require. You wrote, tell him we await his reply in the note you left when you confirmed this appointment. He flicked me a look, and I produced the message Miss Prout had left at 9, which I had kept because Wolfe likes paper that thinks it's ordinary. She had written, we will attend at 2 o'clock. I answer for the house, she said, flushing a line from throat to ear. Yes, Wolfe said. And someone is answering for the house in little strips of typescript using we as a shield. That is one grammar. Another grammar is motion. Mr. Goddard, when you entered, you moved a tin that did not belong on the floor. You did it with your heel and with the side of your glove. You also straightened the umbrella stand a fractional degree. This is not accusation. It is taxonomy. You cannot not manage if you intend to scold me for preferring order. I intend to thank you for revealing yourself, Wolfe said. Someone has been performing a rite in my vestibule and in my kitchen. He chooses to place and displace, to hint with felt, to square what is misaligned. He believes sanctity is a matter of inches. Goddard didn't move. He didn't need to. He just arranged his mouth in a new way. If you imply I've been invading, I imply that you are a man who believes a house speaks, Wolfe said, and that you don't like other people deciding what it says. Miss Prout's fingers tightened on the chair back. Mr. Wolfe, please. Mr. Goddard is protective. He isn't criminal, Wolfe suggested. Ridiculous, Goddard said, which is a nice word when you don't want to use a worse one in another man's office. My duty is to ensure the house does not become a subject of gossip. The committee's situation risked gossip. The teapots risk gossip. You risk gossip. You risked my kitchen, Wolfe said, and if his voice had had a temperature, Fritz would have turned down the flame. I do not accept it. Goddard held my eye for a beat instead of Wolfe's. Then find the person who began this. Who took the envelope? Who typed the first note? He turned his head and looked, not at Miss Prout, not at me, but at the brass tray. He hadn't touched the pot yet. He wanted to, the way a man wants to remove a small stone from a shoe. Mrs. Vardell's name is being used. I will not have it good, Wolfe said softly. We are united in that. He pulled the bell once. Fritz came with a tray of nothing special, water, lemon, glasses that make even water consider its behavior. Goddard watched him set it down and then looked at the glass that was half an inch off the line of the others. He didn't move it. His right index finger pressed his glove seam instead, the kind of pressure you use on yourself when you can't apply it to the world. Mr. Goddard, Wolfe said, you will return to the house and tell Mrs. Vardell that tomorrow morning at 11 we will require her presence again with Mr. Lefebvre and Mr. Portman and Miss Reed. You will tell her it is unavoidable. Miss Prout, you will prepare the household to be inconvenienced. Today you will do nothing else. If another pot appears, you will not bring it. If another note appears, you will not type one in reply. We don't type replies, Miss Prout said, then caught herself. I mean, we don't engage. Engagement is not your failing, Wolfe said. It is your style that betrays you. That is true for all of you. He shifted one thick finger on the desk blotter. Go. I took them to the door. In the vestibule, Goddard paused and looked at the tin he had relocated. He left it where he had put it, which is restraint for a man who believes gravity reports to him. Miss Prout reached for the knob, then stopped and used the side of her hand to avoid fingerprints. That was new, or learned. The door closed, their steps faded. Saul came up the stoop as they went down and didn't even look at the tin. He came straight in, hat low, voice lower. Dyer heard back, he said. The man with the clean voice set a meeting for 8 at the club to discuss custody. Name given at the desk, Portman. But the call to confirm was placed from a private line at a residence on 74th that belongs to a foundation whose treasurer is Tamsin Reed. Our scarf walked by again at 1:30 and admired your brickwork without stopping. And somebody tried your kitchen door at noon and found it locked tighter than morality. Wolfe let him finish, then nodded once, as if every piece had agreed with the piece next to it. Thank you. You will go to the club at 7:50 and watch Mr. Portman be on time. If someone else arrives first and uses him as a credential, you will see who it is. If Mr. Lefebvre appears, notice his scarf. If Mr. Goddard appears, notice his gloves. Do not disturb them. Let them perform. Saul touched his brim and was gone. I picked up the lapsang tin and put it back where Fritz wouldn't have to pray over it. Then I came to the office and looked at the brass tray. The spout still pointed toward the door. The lid sat the whisper deeper that Lefebvre had given it. On the rug's edge, where a man's shoe might hesitate, a white fleck lay, flat, mean little thing. I took a breath, crouched, and teased it up. Flat felt. Not ours. Not Vardell's. The cheap kind from the counterfeit stand. He's borrowing habits, I said. He's borrowing a choir, Wolfe said, opening his eyes on the word. Tomorrow I will give him a congregation. Saul was already at the club when Portman arrived, which is about the order the universe keeps when it wants me to believe in it. At 8 on the nose, Portman gave his name to a desk that had seen names get it wrong for 50 years and was shown to a small room with leather that had opinions. He didn't have to wait long. A minute later, Tamsin Reed came in brisk as an audit with a folder hugged to her side and her mouth set for decisions. Saul, who can watch the mirrored panel by the bar without appearing to see anything but the ice in his glass, fed me the play by phone in a tone that might have been reading me baseball scores. They exchange, he said. She gives him folder. He gives her a receipt with immodest letterhead. He mentions custody. She says we. He likes that. He keeps the folder. She keeps the receipt. Nobody smiles, Lefebvre? I asked. Not yet, Saul said. But your blue worsted passed upstairs 20 minutes before and did not come back down. He could be admiring a painting. Or himself. Goddard? Not a club man, Saul said. He likes houses. Stay, I told him, and went to tell Wolfe his evening was behaving. He grunted something that could have been content. He had the teapot on its tray and his eyes at half-mast, which is when he does carpentry on air. Saul rang again at 8:30. Third period, he said. Your scarf came down the back stairs like a man who owns a back stair. He didn't go to Portman. He left. I could have walked into his pocket and he wouldn't have noticed. He smells like Fixer and wants not to bless him, I said. Follow? Followed, Saul said. To a frame shop on 72nd that is closed, lights on. He showed something in a tube. The shopkeeper shook his head too fast, and your scarf left with the same something. Taste rejected by taste. He doesn't like it. Wolfe's lids moved the width of a postage stamp when I gave him that. Good, he said, which in that tone meant the cheese had finally repinned. Tomorrow we will ask him why he requires frames at night. It will insult his dignity. Do we need Kramer? I asked. Not yet, Wolfe said. He would bring a boot to a tea service. I am arranging cups. We arranged our own. Fritz made sure nothing left the kitchen unless it had his permission slip. The marjoram and the lapsang were back where they could forget being pawns. The night ended without more porcelain. At 9 the next morning, Wolfe ascended for the orchids, leaving me with instructions that could have been sermon notes. Tray here, chair there. Chairs staggered so that no one would be too close to an ally and too far from a sinkhole. He liked the teapot exactly where Lefebvre's fingers had left it. Spout directed toward the door, lid seated a hair low, tray edge kissing the rug line. He called it the altar without a smile and told Fritz to refuse coffee to everyone until told otherwise, which is how you know Wolfe intends to be doctrinal. The bell started the procession at 10:55. Clara first, with Nella Prout behind her, carrying dignity like a stack of files. Then Reed at 11 exactly, with a face that said she had never missed an appointment and never forgiven a train for being late. Portman at 11:02 because men who exercise power like to be 2 minutes late. Lefebvre at 11:03 with a scarf subdued from mourning. Goddard at 11:04, gloves a shade lighter as if he had ironed them, which he probably had. If you want to know what the brownstone looks like when it is truly disturbed, don't imagine shouting. Imagine 6 people who do not share a creed attempting to occupy one room without revealing which pew they prefer. The air had the weight of clean paper. The teapot sat in the middle of the rug like a small animal no one wanted to claim. Wolfe did not do a preface. He looked at each of them in turn, which is like being weighed by a butcher who knows your sins. Mrs. Vardell has engaged me, he said, to stop a vandalism that masquerades as conscience. Someone has used objects as theatre, and a woman's reputation as a wall on which to project his remorse. I am not paid to curate his feelings. I am paid to end his right and to name him. No one spoke. If I had been selling silence, I could have retired. We will begin with an afternoon on Marble Street, Wolfe went on, because our intruder believes that is the scripture. It is not. It is a footnote. He closed his eyes for one deep breath. That's his version of banging a gavel. Miss Reed, you reconstructed a missing envelope with Mr. Portman's diction, Mr. Goddard's paper, and Mr. Lefebvre's presentation. You did it with the certainty of a zealot. Mr. Portman, you suppressed the record because you thought propriety would cover more than truth. Mr. Lefebvre, you coached the photographer because you believe design can edit reality. Mr. Goddard, you manage thresholds, locks, and the tone of the house because you cannot not. None of those are crimes, though some are faults. The crime is the continuous trespass, the notes and the coercion of a confession from a woman who did not err in the way she's accused. Portman's lips pinched. Reed's chin lifted. Lefebvre smiled to his scarf. Goddard was a very polite cliff. What you all have done since, Wolfe said, is try to tidy the story so that it behaves. My vestibule informs me otherwise. He raised a finger. Observe the proposition. Each of you, one at a time, approach it as you would if you believed it were your problem. Do not consult your neighbor. Mrs. Vardell, first Clara looked at him, then at me. I nodded, not because she needed permission, but because sometimes people do better when they can pretend they had it. She walked to the rug and didn't touch the teapot. She stood over it like a woman who knows the difference between a household and a stage. Her hands stayed at her sides. She returned to her chair. Miss Reed, Wolfe said. She went at it like a committee. She moved the pot 3 inches to the center and put the lid on with small finality. She returned, satisfied. Mr. Horn. Portman. He stooped and reached as if to check ownership, hand going for the lid without thinking. Then he caught himself and withdrew, not because he wanted to, but because he remembered an instruction. He glared at it and came back. Mr. Lefebvre. He did the pivot and the align as if he were in a catalogue. The spout ended up toward the door. The tray border kissed the rug. He had the decency to be quick about it. Mr. Goddard. He didn't touch the pot. He straightened the tray 1/8 of an inch and fixed the rug's corner by the chair that had lifted when Portman stood. He looked at me, looking at him, and didn't lower his eyes. Wolfe made a sound like a page turning. Good. You have all confessed to your natures. Now I will ask you to confess to your acts. He opened a drawer and took out a white felt pad, a grey-ridged dot, a smudge of paste protected under glassine, and the copy of the sales receipt we'd been gifted by our liturgist. He arrayed them like a miser with coins. Someone, rather two someones, brought felt into my house. One, the vulgar, brought the flat white and thinks himself clever. The other, the loyalist, shed grey from Mrs. Vardell's tables and cannot help but arrange. Someone with paste moved my umbrella stand, imitating Mr. Lefebvre's staging. Someone with a fixed voice called a photographer to promise custody. Someone with a scarf and impatience for rejection visited a frame shop at night. You see? I needn't invent. You oblige me. He touched the receipt with a forefinger. Mr. Goddard, you bought the felt and you like the good kind. Mr. Lefebvre, you bought stands and you like the white kind. Neither of those by itself is shameful. Combined with trespass, they are Goddard's chin twitched. If you accuse me of entering your kitchen, I will, Wolfe said. But I am not finished. The notes. They are typed by a man who pluralizes himself to make his scolding sound like law. We will confess for you. Only 2 of you use we as a habit. One is a lawyer, whose we is his firm. The letterhead is immodest, and the receipts are careful. The other is a butler, whose we is the house. The house has been speaking in my vestibule. But the grammar of the stage, the paste, the pivot, the alignment, belongs to another. He inclined his head toward the scarf. A man who thinks light can absolve arrangement. Lefebvre's smile didn't break, but it learned manners. And the cause that justifies the violence, Wolfe went on, turning toward Reed. That is Miss Reed's contribution. She cannot abide a narrative that does not conclude with her program succeeding. She will mend it with paper or with shame. She will not lift porcelain, but she will bless the man who does. Reed's color fled and then returned like a tide that wanted a second chance. Portman's jaw worked. This is a tableau of insinuation, he said. Kramer will enjoy it. It will go nowhere. On the contrary, Wolfe said, and turned his head an inch toward the hall. Mr. Fowell. Goodwin. I went to the door and pulled it. Kramer came in without a cigar, and with his hat already set to not enjoying himself. He took in the room, the pot, and Wolfe, and let me see him wish he had stayed home and broken a window for pleasure instead. You said you'd have a show, he growled at Wolfe. You better have it. I do, Wolfe said, and for the first time in 2 days, he leaned forward. Inspector, I will give you the man who planted notes and pots, and the man who abetted him, and the motive for both. I will give you the object that left Mrs. Vardell's drawer, and the hand that reached for it. And then I will give you your satisfaction he let that hang, rich and cruel as butter. But first, he added, we will eat. Kramer didn't like waiting for food any more than Wolfe liked hurrying for justice. But Fritz had soup on the table in 8 minutes, which is as close as the world gets to compromise. We all ate in a silence thick enough to butter, except for Kramer, who slurped with a kind of defiance. When we returned to the office, the tray and the teapot still sat where they had been left. Wolfe glanced at it as if it had been patient. Then he began. Inspector, you have heard the chorus. Now for the soloist. These teapots were not about theft or charity. They were about confession. Someone wanted Mrs. Vardell to admit to something that was not hers to admit. Someone wanted her guilt to cover his shame. He let his eyes travel slowly across the semicircle of suspects until they stopped on Goddard. Mr. Goddard. The butler's face didn't move, but his shoulders drew an inch tighter. Wolfe pressed on. You cannot Help but tidy, Mr. Goddard. The tin on my threshold, the umbrella stand, the tray. You leave your mark every time you try to erase one. You told the maid to be quiet. You fetched the paper that allowed the substitution, and you carried the felt that gave us our first clue. The grammar of the notes is yours. We for the house. You typed them. You placed the pots. Miss Prout made a small sound, half protest, half plea. Goddard silenced her with a tilt of his chin. But you were not alone, Wolfe continued. The staging, the pivot of the pot, the paste on my umbrella stand, the spout toward the door, that was not your hand. That was Mr. Lefebvre's taste, borrowed and imitated. You would not think of spouts and tray edges. You copied. He did not place the pots. You did. But he lent you his theater, because he too had something to lose. The missing envelope was his client's pledge. It went missing because he advised it should vanish. He counseled Portman and Reed how to restore what had never been given. Then he helped you turn porcelain into parable so that Mrs. Vardell would be forced to wear the blame. The zealot, the lawyer, and the aesthete conspired to save a reputation and protect a purse. You, the custodian, carried it into my house. Kramer shifted, scowling. That's a lot of talk, Wolfe. Where's the hook? The hook, Wolfe said calmly, is that last night Mr. Lefebvre attempted to sell a framed print of a photograph he had no right to possess, an image of Mr. Portman's hand at Mrs. Vardell's drawer. When rejected, he carried it out again. He wanted proof controlled, not destroyed. Mr. Goddard wanted penance, not law. Together they devised a liturgy to force Mrs. Vardell to kneel. But they miscalculated. They brought their right into my vestibule. They thought I would see porcelain. I saw fingerprints in Grammar. Lefebvre opened his mouth, but Wolfe's eyes closed in dismissal. Spare me your aesthetic defense. The smear of paste on my stand will interest Inspector Kramer, as will the fixer on your scarf. And Mr. Goddard's typewriter will yield samples of his pluralized sermons. Kramer pushed his chair back like it had burned him. That'll do. I'll have my men pick apart both their dens inside of an hour. Clara let out a breath that might have been waiting 3 weeks. So it was never about me, she said softly. They wanted me to bleed for them. Quite, Wolfe said. You were chosen because your name was loud and your reputation could carry their sin. Pfui. He reached for his beer. You are absolved. Not by me, but by their incompetence. Kramer barked orders into the hall, and in 10 minutes the brownstone emptied of everyone but Wolfe, Fritz, and me. The tray was still in the center, the teapot still obedient to its spout. I bent, lifted it, and asked, "Do we keep it?" "Dispose," Wolfe said, eyes closed, voice final. "This house has its sanctity. I will not have it profaned with props. I carried the pot out like you'd take a stray cat back to the street." When I came in, Wolfe had his glass in hand, and Fritz was announcing squab in cream. The case had ended the way it always does, with Wolfe's appetite restored and mine holding the checkbook. Wolfe sipped, then opened his eyes. There is a lesson, Archie. Some men must confess. Others must be confessed. The coward thinks he can choose. He cannot. I grinned at him. And the teapot? He shut his eyes again. A vulgar chalice, best forgotten, that was Wolfe's benediction. Mine was scribbling the retainer receipt, 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 the retainer receipt.